Well, hello, everybody. Tara Bachland here with the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism for another episode about herbs that can help with trauma. And today we're going to cover Black Cohosh with author, herbalist, poet, no, mama for sure, Amanda Nicole. And if you've joined in, if you've listened to our others, not to be with humility, I say, wow, I think they've been pretty amazing. I know for me, just like being able to talk with you about these things has been healing and nourishing in and of itself. So I can only imagine those, especially who have these types of trauma and wounds. I can only imagine that and hope that it's helpful as well. So I'm delighted to continue this series and continue with Black Cohosh today with you. Briefly, also, this comes from Amanda's book, Flowers for a Girl, Plant Medicine and Sexual Trauma. Now, the herbs that we talk about, we tend to go off on a number of tangents. So the herbs don't necessarily have to do specifically with sexual trauma. I would imagine people who experience all sorts of other trauma, these herbs and certainly herbs can be extremely helpful. And so just want to say that this is based on Amanda's work, which is an absolutely amazing book. I really highly recommend it for those who have experienced various kinds of trauma. I mean, I myself did not go through the same experiences, but other kind of traumatic experiences. And it was really, really helpful. So we've gone into that before, but it's definitely worth reiterating and mentioning again. Thanks for joining me again today, Amanda.
Thank you, Tara. I'm looking forward to it. I'm curious to see what's going to come out, what Black Cohosh wants to say.
They are kind of like you. So at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, one of the classes you teach is a plant attunement or plant journeying. And it's almost like these conversations have been a sort of plant journeying.
Yes. That's how I operate. And even a few moments before before I got on with you for us to begin, I always pray, speak through me, talk through me, and there's a little song I'll sing sometimes. So that's the part of the plants that I love. I love the plant spirit, the journeying, and touching on aspects that are beyond the physical with the plants. So yes, it's plant journeying with just a little more, just a tad more form.
Yes, a tad for sure.
Yeah, only with a tad.
Well, I'm going to pull up a picture. I'm going to find a picture of Black Cohosh while you get us started. How about that?
Yeah, so I'm sort of curious. I said to you before we began that I don't have the same relationship with this plant that I have with others, but it was unquestionably pivotal in my journey. It was actually, so we spoke about violet, that came right away, and then rose when I began the body work. And I believe it was my second session with Katie when Black Cohosh showed up. And it actually showed up just a few minutes before, well, not a few minutes, an hour session or something, before a class with Matt. She and I were both getting ready to have the class with Matt, and my teacher, Teresa, set up a space for us in an alternate room from the yurt. And I had the session with her, and Black Cohosh came during that session. And do you mind if I just tell the story? It's in the book, but I could just begin with this story.
Yeah.
So I laid down on the table for her to begin the work, and I suddenly saw myself. This was the first time I'd had this experience. I felt myself floating above my body, and I remember thinking to myself, it sort of reminded me of how people described like near-death experiences, like those type of out-of-body experiences. It really had this feeling of just my soul being outside of my body, looking down on my body. And then my body turned into the house that I grew up in. And I was floating above the house, which is real curious. I'm just going to say this because I wonder if other people have had this experience. For several years before I began to remember, when I would go home to Tennessee to visit my family, they were no longer living in that house. My mom had moved when I was in college. But every single trip, I just suddenly wanted to go by the house. And I would ask my husband at the time, can we drive by the house? Can we drive by that? Constantly. And I would, the elementary school I went to was directly across the street. So sometimes I'd even go on my own, while my kids were occupied with my mom, with their grandmother, and, people were busy. And I just sit in the driveway and stare at the house. And I wasn't thinking, what happened in that house. I was just so drawn to it, like nostalgia, but maybe that's not really the word we're looking for, but that was a feeling I had. So, anyways, it's interesting that my body became this house and I was floating over the roof of it and I was trying to figure out how to get into the house. Oh, this is a really funny story. Okay, well, I'll tell that one in a minute. So, anyways, so I hear Katie say to me, where are you, Amanda? And I said to her, I'm floating above my house, the house I grew up in. And she said to me, let's not visit the house today. She said, can you feel your spine? And I couldn't feel it. I couldn't place it. Like, I couldn't bring my awareness to that part of my body. And so she asked me again to try. And so I sort of, tried to sink from the sky down into my body. And what I saw was my spine, but it was awful. It was like fossilized. Like there was just no life in my spine at all. And but I told Katie, okay, I found it. I'm here. And she said to me, let's try to move some energy up and down your spine. So that sort of undulation, which is a signature of black cohosh. If you look at the stalks, some of them are straight, but they have that curve. And Matt will talk about that with snake medicine. You can see it well on the one to the far right there, a little bit of that curve. The snake medicine and then the spine. And so we started to move the energy, or I tried. It took me a second to feel the flow. And then suddenly it was like my spine was the horizon and all of these little lights started turning on, like the way a city would at night when all the lights start to come on in a city. And I wasn't saying any of this out loud, I was just noticing it. And then I heard Katie say in a very excited voice, do you feel it, Amanda? Do you feel it? And she said, this is such a significant phrase, really. She said, your nervous system is coming back online. And I was like, was it off? But what I was going to learn is that, yeah, it was. I mean, it's sort of sad, and I'll stop here and we'll see where it goes. But a lot of times when we experience trauma in various forms, and I think Black Cohosh does particularly touch on sexual abuse, manipulation, possession, things like that. We are dead inside. We're not alive. The nervous system really does shut off so that we don't have to, feel at all. So we'll begin there. We can see where it takes us. But that was how Black Cohosh first came in, was during that session. I could keep going with how it materialized, but I don't know if you just want to stop here for now.
Well, a question that came to mind is, because I think this could really help people who also are not aware if their nervous system is shut off, is in hindsight, what were the clues that it was shut off?
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness, there's so much. I'm such a different person now than I was. First of all, we are talking about Black Cohosh, and so this is a medicine of the womb. It is a medicine that has sexual energy. There's really, I don't think, any way to get around that with Black Cohosh. So part of it was I never felt anything, nothing. Like I'm gonna tell you, these conversations have been so personal for me. I've talked a lot. I have a podcast. I've done videos and interviews. I've written that book, written another book, but there's just so much that wants to come out. So I really appreciate you creating this space. because I know other people have these experiences.
Mhm.
So, for instance, I've been married twice. So the first time that I was married, it was what I call a Britney Spears marriage because we dated for 2 years and then we got married, and we were only married for 3 months before he just had some sort of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde breakdown, and um, it just dissolved. He wasn't well. But on our honeymoon, because I was raised in the church and all these things, so that was the first time that we were together. It was on our honeymoon. It was really an extremely unpleasant experience for me. But one of the things that I remember that was very understandably offensive to him was that I couldn't feel him. So when we were together intimately, when there was intercourse, absolutely no sensation. This is very personal, but I think it's important because I think other people have this experience. So I said, because I was only 19 and I was raised in the church and I just had no sense. And I actually said, well, are you there? Is it there? It's very offensive for him, but I wasn't meaning it mean. So no sensation, no feeling. I know that's a very intimate story, but I think this is more common than some of us would like to say. Then I had children, right? So it wasn't until my fourth child, which was after I went through this process with healing with the sexual trauma. It was only with my fourth child that I felt anything when they were born. So, people will talk about, as the baby, comes through the birth canal, and they'll talk about the ring of fire and the stretching and the burning. Mm-hmm. I mean, just no sensation, like at all. Also, I never moved my hips like they were locked, you know? And part of that was the way I was raised, like, don't move your hips because that's sexual and you don't want to be sexual and you don't want to draw attention to yourself. And you basically want to act like you don't even have any sexual organs or sexual feelings. I mean, that really is part of, there's the trauma of sexual abuse or sexual trauma, but there's also that kind of trauma that comes in with like religious trauma, and psychological trauma, how it plays in. But also there's that locking because I didn't want anybody to notice that I had hips. I
Mhm.
didn't want anyone to notice that I was sexual because I don't want you to respond to me that way. So they were sort of locked. And so I had really pretty intense lower back pain to the point of vomiting several times in my um, late teens, early 20s, you know, but now it's like, I'll be walking through the grocery store, and it's just more natural. They move. They're not locked. So these are some things, but also just um, enjoyment, and not just sexual enjoyment, but life, like to smell things,
Mhm.
to dance, to laugh, to feel joy, to be in my body, to even know that my body not only feels pleasure but can feel pain, like that it hurts. Also, I had, and I still do have some scoliosis, but I wasn't born with it. It came later. And it was interesting because right before I began to remember, I'd always known it. You could see it. It was there a little bit, just like one hip a little to the side. But right before I began to remember, it just really started to become prominent.
Mhm.
And then as I began to remember, it started to shift back into place, and like become straighter. So, and Matt does talk about that. I don't know if it's in one of his books, it might be, but I know it's been in lectures of Black Cohosh being connected to things that are crooked and twisted. So the spine with scoliosis, or for me, my teeth. It was very bad when I was little. And I write about this in my book, like, God bless dentists and orthodontics, because if they didn't exist, you know, I probably wouldn't have gotten married. Nobody would have wanted to. I mean, my two front teeth here, my two front teeth, they not, there's a lot here because there's like genetics and Appalachia and all sorts of things, but they came in like this. So here are teeth, but they came in like this. And I write about it in my book where I couldn't even eat like food, and my bottom teeth were so crooked they had to pull some of them. But this is like part of like, if it's like at a certain age where things happen, like the spine and development, like starting to twist, with the spine, with the teeth. So there was even like a straightening of my body. So there was a loosening of my body, a straightening of my body, an ability to feel sensations in my body and to be okay with that, to not be afraid of it, to be comfortable with it. I'll pause. That was a lot. See how that lands.
Thank you. It's a nice so some thoughts that came to mind. The trauma that I had experienced was actually more later triggered by another similar event, but another person, but similar type people. And over a couple of years, I noticed that I actually went to an herbalist and I said, I have not been able to cry for a couple of years. And like, I was not normally a big crier anyways, but there was just something in me that just knew that something's not quite right. That even a really sad movie or whatever that might normally be a tearjerker for me. And it was a couple years later I brought it up to a therapist, or it actually started to unravel. And it was that time also that I was seeing a therapist. And she explained, that we'll protect ourselves in that way, that because we don't want to feel the bad feelings, we will shut down our feelings, which also means that you don't feel the good feelings. I mean, it's
Yeah,
great in a way because you're protecting yourself and so you're protecting from the bad feelings,
it
but
is.
you don't get, life is then like a flat line.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I've heard people recently say, just different conversations that I've had, and I take great hope in these conversations that the depth at which we can feel the pain is also the height at which we can feel the joy. Like the ability to hold this is also the ability to hold that. But sometimes, as we've said, the pain is just overwhelming. And to where, and this is interesting, I'm so glad that you brought this up because and like I said, you can't get away from sexuality with Black Cohosh. It's just impossible. But so I would also have this feeling as I got older. So my first husband, um, and like honestly, we were just both so young, and who even knows what all? I don't even know. It was rough. So he did his thing and he left, and then I ended up married again, and I did have more sensation in my body then, because um, time passes and we do have experiences, and we do begin to open up even the littlest amount. But what I would notice is that, and again, there's a lot of factors to this, but when we were together, if I was enjoying how it was feeling, suddenly I would just hit a wall and shut off, just completely shut off. And I wouldn't feel anything after that, nothing. And part of it was I can't handle that intensity, right? Because I haven't um, allowed myself to process this other intensity, right? So it's like I just can't. And it's interesting when you use the word unravel. When you said that a moment ago, it's like, beautiful word for Black Cohosh, because those that are familiar with the roots of Black Cohosh, which is primarily the part of it that's used for physical medicine, it's just a tangled knot, So this unraveling, um, is part of what has to begin, But it's no small knot. It makes me think of the Gordian knot. How people talk about you just got to cut it. You just got to cut the Gordian knot. Thankfully, Black Cohosh is a lot more pleasant. It really does start to to do the unwinding and the unraveling, but I'd like to touch on that too, because that was part of the moment that I had with Katie in that same session. Once we got the movement up and down the spine, it would always hit this one spot in the small of my back, and it would like hit that spot, and it wouldn't keep flowing through it. It would like jump over it. And she was like, she could feel it even though I wasn't speaking it. She's just so gifted, and she said, bring your attention to that place, in your spine. And when I brought my attention there, it was just a knot, just knotted, gnarly, black, awful mess. And I just remember looking at it thinking, oh my God, like, what is that? What do you even do about it, right? And
Mhm.
I was still quite new to herbalism. I was in my first or second year with Teresa, I can't remember. And she was my first teacher. But I was laying there, and I remember seeing that knotted, just gnarly mess at the base of my spine and thinking to myself, isn't there a plant that looks like that? And
Mhm.
as I was laying there thinking that, I saw, black cohosh come over my body and match my spine, and then show me its root, and its root sort of hovered like right over that place on my, and I was like, yes, that's it. And so that ended up being the plant that I continued to work with through that particular session, and really experienced its medicine very powerfully during that session and following. But that's how it came to me, was that presentation of this knotted mess that needs to unravel.
Mhm. It's so cool. So many interesting ties. What came to my mind earlier too was the aspect of shame and guilt, and how those who are victims, it is so common, if not just given, that the victim carries the shame and the guilt of the situation, even though it wasn't their overt action. It wasn't their quote fault, right? And it's so strange. And just as that is part of like the knot, right? That we get caught up in our own thoughts, like, I it's hard to think your way out of the situation. It's hard to get out of the situation, sometimes physically, but especially mentally.
Yeah, that's a lovely thing to touch on with Black Cohosh, because, again, Matt puts it forward as some of its specific indicators being for depression, but a particular kind of depression. So, blue vervain is wonderful for postpartum depression, like a shutdown and overwhelm. There are lots of things, right? But Black Cohosh is more, he'll use the word brooding, right? Or a dark cloud. And so when you talk about, you get tangled up with these thoughts in your mind, that idea of brooding, right? Or just darkness or heaviness, like in the mind. And I love that you said you can't think your way out of some of this.
Mhm.
So, you can already tell from our last couple of conversations, you're going to be able to tell in this one, and, ones to come. Um, I, I know that talk therapy can be beneficial, but we've got to feel things, like we've got to get into our body. The nervous system has to turn on. We, like you said, we've got to cry, we've got to dance, we've got to be able to feel a part of our body. Like, I literally could not feel my spine. It took me a minute to find it. I mean, that's a really important part of us. You know what I'm saying? So you can't think your way out of some of these things. You've got to feel your way through them, which is can be really scary when we felt things that were horrible or painful, or even, like you say, shameful. That's one of the lovely things about black cohosh, and there's a lot of plants like this. Like American holly is definitely like this, but there's lots. um, Part of black cohosh, it has snake medicine. And, part of snake medicine is what some people would be familiar with this term, like the kundalini, the sexual energy. And so they'll talk about, it's like a snake at the base of the spine, and you wake it up, right? And it moves up the spine, right? So a lot of times, and Matt talks about this, that this is part of why black cohosh can sometimes be indicated for things that become twisted. And he talks about how that twisting can begin because psychic energy or sexual energy is awakened too early. So, yes, this person has the ability to be sexual. Yes, this person has the ability to be psychic, but not at the age of 7 or something. You see what I'm saying? And so it begins to twist because it's too much. Like, I'm not I don't have like the container yet,
Mhm.
right? I don't have the nervous system yet in a lot of ways to feel these sensations. And so it gets shut down. It gets clammed shut. So when with black cohosh and the snake medicine and this gnarly where I can't get the fluid, the cerebral spinal fluid, right? Matt talks about that with black cohosh, the energy to move into it. But when I begin to unravel it, when I begin to make space, when begin to move it, what happens? Then the sexual energy begins to wake back up. The kundalini begins to wake back up. And then I feel what was uh, shamed, what we have guilt over, begins to actually find its rightful power, and direction and fire in a way um, that's positive, and that's going to require feeling. We don't think our way through that. we
Mhm.
move, we move our way through it. We feel it. So I just think that that's really um, an important statement to make. That like, wow, I can just really feel it in my body. It's like I can feel that coach saying, "Don't think your way through it. Just move your hips," which is scary for some of us, or they might even be locked. But it's like even just the littlest bits of movement to begin to like move the fluid. So it really is not just moving energy, but even nourishing and moistening real physical parts of the body that just haven't received those sensations. So just imagine if you don't have that flow of cerebral spinal fluid up and down the spine, all the nerve endings and all the things that are connected to all the other systems of the body that aren't able to flow, to communicate, like digestion, heart, all sorts of things, like just that connection to the whole body um, coming online.
Mhm. I'm curious to hear how the transition went. And it can sound scary. I can imagine myself listening to this and thinking, well, maybe I don't want it to release. That could be scary re-experiencing it. In my experience with herbs, that which if this is new news to you, herbs really do help with the emotional state. It's absolutely incredible. And I too believe that there's definitely a role for talk therapy. I think it helps the mind process, and also use, just from my own experience, helps to quell the fear of it happening again because you are naive. And so through talk therapy, you can be informed of how, getting familiar with those feelings again, listening to those feelings, being able to identify, because our body signals to us all sorts of stuff about our environment. And when you've been through trauma or abuse, you lose connection with those feelings, right? Even simple warning signs, like a person who's maybe not a great person to be around.
Mhm.
And so I think that the talk therapy helps with that, so you can consciously reconnect. And then the herbs, in my experience with releasing those deep feelings, I haven't necessarily found that I have to go through those same feelings again. It's been more of like a really significant release, maybe a good cry, maybe a stompy foot session, but also expected. It didn't necessarily come out of nowhere, which I think can happen with trauma that is not treated, is not addressed. So I think it at least, it's like it provides a channel for that energy to release. I'm curious, what was your experience?
Yeah, so I would say that some of the plants we've talked about in the past, like violet, and we've had conversations about cleavers at times, and rose, um, and cleavers especially. That story about how there was all that rage where I thought my heart was going to stop, and Katie said, "Don't worry about it. We'll come back later." And when we came back the next month, there was none of that, and it was just beautiful cleavers, just purifying the water in my heart, and there was none of that fear, panic, or rage, so there was that gentleness. So I do find that with the plants. But I will say that black cohosh, not working with black cohosh, it's not black cohosh that's doing it, if you understand what I'm saying, but the black cohosh in me, like the part that black cohosh is drawing out, has been difficult. So part of what Matt talks about is that black cohosh, he talks about how it will like draw out the rash for things like measles and meningitis. He talks about like eruptive diseases. That's the term he uses. That black cohosh helps sort of bring the rash, like draw it to the surface, and draw it out. Okay, so this is what happened to me with black cohosh. So I had this session with Katie, which there are other aspects of it I hope we touch on because there are really lovely parts of it that are black cohosh medicine. But when it was over, it was a very powerful session. I just had another part of it come to my mind I had forgotten. Remind me to talk about my grandmother. she just came in, so remind me. And I cannot believe that I'm just not touching on that. So when it was over, it might have been that very weekend. If it was, and it was within the month. That's usually how it was. I was having these little segments. Mm-hmm. I got these sores in my mouth. I think it was that weekend because it snowed and I got snowed in at a friend's house. I couldn't get back to my house from the herbal classes. We did get snowed in with Matt at the yurt once, and during that season, but I also got snowed in at my friend's house, not being able to make it back. But all these sores in the inside of my lips. And when I say I had sores on the inside of my lips, I mean, I couldn't really even talk. Oh, talk like this. I can't really do it, And it was hard to even eat, and they just came up. And thankfully, I have done this a lot in my life. On the one hand, I recommend it. On the other hand, only you know what your body needs. But a lot of times my body will do things and I just let it. Because I'm aware that I don't need to go to the doctor. I know what it's doing. It's releasing this or it's working through that, but we all have to like make the call, right? But I let my body do it. I didn't go in and say something's wrong. Will you make it stop? Because and this was before I recall having a conscious knowledge of the eruptive disease part, but I just had this like knowing that it was connected to the black cohosh, which it just sort of seemed obvious to me that we had just done all this work on my spine. There had been this hideously awful black icky knot that ended up having this huge spider over it, which was my mom, like a poisonous spider over it like this. So, and we've moved it, we've shaken it up, right? So probably am going to have some eruptions, So I just tended myself, and it was very painful though. And I'm not saying if you use black cohosh, that is what will happen to you. That's just the way that my body chose to release it. And I did have that happen a couple more times through my process, but not as severe as at that appointment. And at those times, it was very easy for me to make the one-to-one connection. Also with the black cohosh, not using it. I want to be clear on this. Like, it's doing a good work, right? So like when Matt says it draws the rash to the top so it can be released, this is a good work. We want it to do this, right? So it was actually towards the end of the process for me, and I think I had actually even already started to write Flowers for a Girl some. I would have these episodes where I think I've talked about them in the past, where my ear would fill up, I'd get vertigo, my eyes would slam shut, I wouldn't be able to open them. It was like a muscle spasm for hours, and then I would vomit for hours. Well, one of the times that this happened, there's nothing to do when those things would happen. I mean, what are you going to do? You can't open your eyes. You have vertigo and you're vomiting. You're not going to do anything. So you just lay in bed and, crawl to the toilet as needed or whatever. But I was laying in bed and I started to feel so fevered, like crazy fevered in my body. Like, and I write about this episode in my book. It was the kind of fever where I was just like restless, like you're tossing and turning, you know. But I knew, for me, I knew what was happening. Like I'm processing something. And what I saw was what I had seen at my session with like Cohosh was that spider come onto the um, small of my back again. And I was like aware of its like poison, its toxicity, you know? And I was just tossing and turning and just trying to open myself up to let it move through me. Like just trust the body to move it through because it's been sitting there for years and we don't really want that in there, right? You know, so to just let it move through me, but very fevered, lots of tossing and turning, and even while I laid in bed that day, I remember like moving my hips a lot, taking my hands and opening my hips just to stretch, just to get some relief because all this energy, you know, in my lower back and in my hips and my legs, especially, and Matt talks about this, that Black Cohosh has a connection to like he calls it, I think, the meat of the muscles. So like the thigh, like that inner thigh, just the meat that's there. Like so a lot of times women will benefit from using a black cohosh root tincture um, if if before their cycle or maybe during it they get an ache, like a dull ache, you know, in their thighs, you know. And part of it is, and this is a huge part of black cohosh medicine, that, you know, the gnarly knotting that needs the unraveling, but it's stagnation, it's congestion, everything's congested here. This is black cohosh. So I just tried to work with it and like open up, you know, just open up and move, and at that time I could, right, to just help move it through. So those were a couple of experiences I had that, no, they didn't feel good. But I trusted my body and I understood what was happening. And so I just tended myself. I took black cohosh and I took other plants too and just nourished the body, moving itself through the process. So those are a couple of difficult ones. There were others that were maybe more pleasant, but you know, it's a powerful medicine. It really is. You know, it's even one that a lot of times when herbalists will offer it to women for different issues with their cycles, you know, so flooding, you know, heavy bleeding sometimes can be an indicator for it, you know, if it fits like a larger pattern, clots, you know, the aching that I'm talking about in the bones, things like that. But, you know, you have to be more careful with it, I've found. And I think other herbalists have found the same than you do with others that are regularly given to help with cycles. Usually, I recommend that women take it the first part of their cycle before they ovulate and then pause after ovulation and let the body move through the rest of the process because there can be an increase in bleeding sometimes with women if you take it all the way up to that point. So it's a real powerful medicine, a blood mover. But Matt talks about like all fluids in the body. So when you were talking about crying, like a fluid, or when I'm talking about my spine, cerebral spinal fluid, just restoring flow. Restoring flow and removing the congestion.
Especially when you mentioned the spider. The images, there's so much that has to do with Scorpio. In medical astrology, Black Cohosh has to do with scorpionic energy. And of course, I mean, the flowers, the herb itself is not black, but it's called Black Cohosh. Scorpio is related to poisons and kind of toxins, and so even perhaps that was actually something that was coming up in your body. It was helping your body get rid of something from your body that it apparently didn't need. And that's that in Matt's books too. He talks about the law of direction of cure and how, you know, things coming to the surface and coming out. You actually, like you mentioned, you want that to happen. You want,
yes,
especially if there's any kind of poison toxicity. And certainly the spider, a poisonous spider in particular, and just kind of a dark. He calls it a dark brooding energy, right? If you have a PMS that right before menstruation, you have kind of a dark brooding, and feel better when your menses begins, and so it's so interesting, these patterns and similes throughout nature, throughout life. Yeah.
I love it. I think it's beautiful, because a lot of times people would hear these kind of stories or read my book and think, oh, that's ridiculous. That didn't have to do with that. And that didn't have to do with that. And then, you read a book from Matt or you hear about indigenous practices or even, things that might be considered scientifically proven or research. And that's exactly what it does.
Mm-hmm.
It brings these things to the surface. It releases congestion, all these things. And we can talk about them in a physical way and we can talk about them in an emotional, spiritual way. They're both. And it's good that you mentioned the dark and brooding because we haven't touched on the dark part. We did touch on the brooding, but Matt does talk about how a lot of times women that he thinks, for which black cohosh is indicated for something about their picture, that their coloring will even be like a dark, sort of coloring. And I had this woman once that was a client of mine, and I knew her family just intimately, but I never placed her this way until she was sitting in front of me for a session. And she had really thick varicose veins, so a lot of congestion of the blood and the fluids. She had a lot of flooding with her cycles, to the point of just concern, what was happening. But also, she was quite manipulative with her husband and her children, very much so. But also, she had people be manipulative with her. Like she had been manipulated and she was manipulative. And Matt will use that term with it. It's a very specific word for Black Cohosh, manipulative relationships. And she was a Puerto Rican woman, and she had like that coal black shiny hair, but her eyes were also just almost coal black, and she was beautiful. But this particular session, like all of that, the hair and the eyes just became so pronounced while she was talking, and she actually started to turn into black cohosh in front of me. And I remember like widening my eyes to like focus so I could see her like human form and shape, because all these indicators were coming together for her. So the dark thoughts, but Matt does indicate sometimes the dark coloring of hair and eyes, just like he would with pulsatilla. If you've got like the blonde hair, light skin, sometimes will be there, right? So that's definitely a part of it. And even the darkness, I'm so glad we're touching on this, of going into the dark. So we've talked a lot, and we can keep talking about it, about the roots, which are in the earth, knotted, black and gnarly. But we've got the stalk coming up. That's this stalk of white flowers that some in my classes have described as a torch or a candle, or I had someone call it a fairy wick, and so then we have light. So we're talking about it in a lot of ways, emphasizing dark, which is part of the medicine, but also part of the medicine is bringing light into the dark. And so that was part of my first session with her. Was once we got it moving and we found that gnarly knot, we sort of spent some time with that. And then she was noticing that obviously my womb space, was some cavernous black hole, I mean, it was dead inside. And so she said to me, can you shine some light into this space? And I just couldn't. And I tried everything. I tried to put like I tried to move light down that flow, but it would kind of get stuck at that little hump. That little hump was there for a long time, but there's probably still some of it, to be honest. You know, so I couldn't move it down that way. And then I just tried to imagine it, all these things. I even tried in this like body work herbal session. I in my mind's eye, I created this like nighttime construction work light, this big construction work light. And I was trying to like turn it down and I couldn't even do it. And it was just like, what is happening? And suddenly I said to her, could I sing? I just felt like I wanted to sing. I'm really feeling it in my throat all of a sudden too. Hold on a second. And she said, sure, whatever you need to do. So I started to sing. I'm going to sing it. There's 2 songs actually, but I'm just going to sing one for now. We'll see if the other one comes. So I just thought I'll just sing. And it's almost like the singing was like, it felt to me like 2 things. One, I felt like I should. It was rising up, to sing. But one, it felt like an invitation or an invocation, and also it felt like a way to release, because it felt hard to do what she was asking to, like, and that's, you could feel your body like tensing up. So to sing felt like a form of release or a way to express while also like inviting and like an invocation. So I just started to sing, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. You know it. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And as I did that, I started to see this little tiny, like, candle flame start to like flicker inside my womb space. And Katie could, feel it, notice it, because I was very quiet. You can't really communicate all you're seeing. You don't even want to. And she said, keep going. I see it, And so then I sang this other song, which I used to sing at the beginning of almost every herbal class I ever taught. And I haven't sang it in such a long time. Let's see. There is a candle in every soul, some brightly burning, some dark and cold. There is a spirit who brings a fire, ignites the candle, and makes its home. So carry your candle, run to the darkness, seek out the helpless, the tired and worn. Carry your candle for all to see it. Take your candle and go light your world. Take your candle and go light your world. So I sang that song, and like suddenly in my womb, it wasn't like the sun, but it was light. It was glowing. And this happened while black cohosh with its light wave was over top of me. And I had seen the lights lighting up on my spine to bring light into that space. It's a very powerful part of its medicine.
In general, or do you think specifically for you?
I think it's a very general part of its medicine. So a part of its medicine that we've not touched on because we're focusing on trauma and sexual energy is a very creative plant. So years later, when my focus in being with it isn't on trauma, right? Isn't on healing and restoring, or whatever the words are, this emotional aspect of myself, my body. I was sitting with it in a class, and it said to me, we are creative. And it was like, guys, come on, engage with me and help me help you create things. So if we think about it, when we begin to wake up the sexual energy, we're waking up the creative force inside of us, right? And so part of what Black Cohosh said to me once was, you know, what turns you on? So part of it is like what turns you on sexually, right? But what turns you on? What lights you up? What gives you joy in life? What makes you want to dance? What makes you want to paint? What makes you want to sing? What do you do and create and put into the world that turns you on, that lights you up? And then it also said to me, what's inside? Ready? We've already talked about this, but it presented this medicine at a different time in this way. What wants to rise from your depths? So we've talked about it like, and it's true, this eruptive disease, these toxins we want to get out. Okay, well, once we get the toxins out and we don't have them floating on the surface, what is in your depth that wants to rise up? Like this magical magic wand paintbrush where you want to be creative. So I do think it's part of its medicine. I just think, to be honest, um, it's not often that we get to experience that part of its medicine. And I don't think it's often that its medicine is given for that reason, because, and this isn't like to fault any of us, it's just the nature of being human at this time. We're just still doing so much work clearing out the debris. That it's just such an emphasis on clearing out the debris and the toxins that it takes some time to get to the point where, okay, so what would you like to draw? What would you like to paint? Because we really do have to move through some of those other layers first before we even know what's inside of us that even wants to come out in a creative way.
Oh, there's so much to touch on there. Just so I'm really glad that you brought up the creative aspect, because clearly, with working on the sexual organs and in that area, the second chakra, right? And that is, literally and figuratively a creative area. And also, I think what bubbled up in me is like a sense of hope.
Yes.
Because when you are working through the trauma, and whether you know it or not, like there was a lot of stuff that I just didn't know was there. And then it's kind of like, oh, wow, there's this part of me that I didn't know. And it can be delightful at the same time. It doesn't, because so much of the conversation, like you said, has been oriented around trauma, and it doesn't need to be, it sounds like a lot of negative kind of experience. Like you have to go through breakouts and all this, and emotions and stuff, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Yeah.
And it's unearthing yourself.
Yeah. It's unearthing yourself. And as you were saying that, I was thinking, unearthing the light, because that's what's in there. Yeah. That is what's in there. And so when she said to me, your nervous system is coming back online, or when Black Cohosh says to me, I can turn you on. The point is you're off, right? You're off. So to be turned on is to what? Is to turn the light on. It's to turn the light on. That's an interesting too, that I just said that, because the first time that I had a flashback, I don't know if you remember, we talked about it, but it was really, I didn't even know that word. Like, I still don't. I didn't then, I don't now. It's like 30 years of my life. I don't watch TV, and I don't read a lot of, I just can't handle a lot of things, and I'm just not interested. So I didn't actually have flashback as a term, and I hadn't watched movies where someone has a flashback. It's not the way it worked. It was actually, I think it might have been Teresa, when I called her my teacher, who was like, honey, that was a flashback, the way she talks. Because I was like, what just happened? But while that was happening, I told you, I had my hands over my eyes, and I kept repeating over and over, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, and I was having all these sensations in my body. But what I kept saying to my husband at the time, because it was the middle of the night, it was in our room, the lights were off, I kept saying, turn on the light, turn on the light, turn on the light, turn on the light, right? But I'm sitting here like this, you know. But as soon as he turned on the light, even though my hands were covered and it was the middle of the night, I could actually, you know, you guys had this experience. I could feel the light. I knew the light was on, you know, through my hands. And it was comforting. So this aspect of, yeah, to turn the light on, you know, in so many ways, our nervous system and just our own inner light, like with Black Cohosh, to look at, I mean, look at it, how it stands. It's so noticeable. You know, if you go out into the woods, you're going to recognize it when it's in bloom, you know? So this ability to shine our light, you know, and I want to read this. I knew I wrote this down for a reason. I was like, I don't know. I was like looking over some things before this, and I found this message that I had given to a client, because a lot of times when I have one-on-one sessions, we almost always end up sitting with the plant, and they receive what they receive and I receive what I receive for them. And then in follow-up, I'll send them, you know, the message I received for them. And this was one that was in some of my notes that I wrote down. I reach for the light. I reach for the light from my depths. I am not extinguished. I will never be extinguished, and neither will you. You are eternal. Break free, rise up, shine. You are electrifying. And I think so often when we have things happen to us, that's how we feel. And in a certain way, that's how we are. Like we feel extinguished. Our light's been put out, right? And so I look down in my womb space and she's like, shine some light. And I'm like, this is impossible. But there's still, like you said, like there was a little flame, a little flicker, like of hope, right? And it just needed someone to fan it.
Mhm.
You know, like you haven't been extinguished. I wrote a song about that too. Maybe that'll come to me before this is over. Oh, yep, it was called I See Your Light. Yeah, at the end when we're finished, I would like to sing that one before we end.
Well, sounds wonderful. A number of people are commenting how beautiful your scene was. Lana says, "I'm at the song part. So beautiful, heart," and a number of hearts. Uh,
Voting.
you were singing. It was really, really beautiful. Yes. So another, I'm sure we'll all really enjoy. So what was interesting to me is that you were trying to even take this big construction floodlight, right, and shine it, and it was through that song that it sounds like you opened up to what is your particular light,
Yeah.
right? A candle, getting the image or even the sensation perhaps of a candle. It needed to be your light.
Yes. Right. It's because I was coming at it from, like you were saying, an external place. Like I had something out here that I was trying to shine into it, right? Instead of my internal light. And it's interesting too, because when we're talking about the womb space there, and even especially Black Cohosh with um the spinal column, we're all the way down to the sacrum. Just the very point where we began.
Mm.
The little point of light where we started, like this is you and it can't be extinguished. So yeah, it's your light, literally right there. Like your point of origin. So yes, that was part of it, was this external way of being, and also trying to force it. So like when we're talking about knots, and we need to unravel them. We've all had that experience, like women with jewelry, like if your necklaces get all tangled, or other things, or Christmas lights, that if you're forcing and pulling, it just makes it tighter. So the singing is also a way of, like, we're not going to force it. We're going to be gentle and just loosen some parts, and then it begins to fall away. So I think you're right about my light, not external, but that very point there for me. And then also it's a gentle way, because I really was trying to force it, which is fine, it's understandable. And I think that's one of the lovely things with the plants. I've said it before, I've said it so many times, that I just love how gentle they are with the work, because you talked about talk therapy earlier and how it can be beneficial, and it can. But the part about it that where it finds its limits, where I think body work, energy work, plants, other modalities come in that are wordless, is when two things. One, I didn't even know what to say. Like, I remember my mom was like, thought everything I was doing was ridiculous. And she thought I should go to talk therapy, and not just any talk therapy, but like particularly a Christian form of talk therapy, which was just a no for me. Some of it can be beneficial, but the thing she wanted me to go to was a modality where basically they just read you the Bible and then they tell you you're sinning. And then if you just confess your sins, then you'll feel better, which is just really not it. But part of what I tried to communicate to her at the time was, but I don't even know what to say. Like if someone said, "What happened to you?" I don't have the words. Like I don't know how to answer your question. Or if someone were to say to me, "How do you feel about it?" I don't know. Like, cuz I was so kind of just shell shocked. I didn't have words. So when we don't have words, because sometimes we don't, and we don't need other people during those times putting words into our mouth. Not that, like, counselors or therapists will. I'm sure they'd be careful not to, but it just is a really important time, like you said, to not only find our light, but to find our own words, our own ways of wanting to describe it. But also, secondly, and I mentioned this in a past time together, our bodies, they're not interested in re-traumatizing us. So like you said, we're not going to necessarily feel what we felt at that time. We'll feel what we're able to feel. And so sometimes to say it just feels like too much. But if I could just feel, it's not even the word, but you understand what I'm saying. If I could find another way to engage it, it would make it more bearable, right? Until we get to a place where, which I did, that I did begin to find words. I did begin to find ways that I can talk about it. And then, just like you said, when we talk, it's helpful to you. It's helpful to me. I can't even believe some of the stuff I say all these years later. I'm like, well, I guess that needed to be said again. I mean, it is helpful, but now I can, and it doesn't make me hyperventilate, get choked up, throat tighten, want to vomit, feel overwhelmed, get vertigo. See, so I think that those are really lovely parts about the plants, that they come to us and can so gently move us through some of these things, even the things that might not feel the best, like if you do have an eruption or something, until we get to the place where we're strong enough to engage it in a more like embodied present way, because a lot of these ways it's they're indicating we're not quite ready to be in the body. It's almost like the body, it's not really well enough for us. It doesn't have room for us yet. It's not safe for us yet, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You asked me to remind me about your grandmother.
Oh, thank you. I don't know what she once said, but she wants to be noted. So I should note her. So black cohosh um, is traditionally used as a women's herb with indigenous people, especially for birth. Um, so it's very much of the womb. It's very much for women. So there's very much this connection. And I have mentioned the spider that was on the small on my back, which I've always identified that particular spider with my mother. It's not a friendly spider. Like you said, more scorpionic. That was a really good word. Thank you for bringing that image in. But a lot of times we'll connect the spider with grandmother, you know? So that was the first time that I met my indigenous grandmother. This is so funny. Let me tell you a story. When I was in the second grade, now I did not know, my family had not done genealogies. There was no such thing as ancestry.com. My family, they like ate, I don't know, Oreos and peanut M&Ms and drank Coke and nobody cared about our ancestors. Okay? You know what I'm saying? So, but I remember in second grade, I told my second grade class that I had an Indian grandmother. And they were like, "Ooh, you do? That's so amazing." I'm like, "Yeah, I do, okay." And I meant it. There was this boy in my class, and he was like, "No, you don't. You have to prove it." You know how that is. And I was like, "Fine, I'll prove it." So I went home because, like I said, the elementary school was directly across from my house, and the playground with the, like, what is it, chain link fence was that part across from my house. So I told everybody after school, come over to the chain link fence. I'll prove it when I was in second grade. So I went home. This is terrible what I'm getting ready to say. I'm acknowledging this. My mom had made an Indian costume for a Thanksgiving gathering at our church. And I asked her if I could, where'd you put it? Where is it? So she got it out for me. I put it on. I fixed my hair. I braided my hair. And I went out and I sat on my sidewalk and I just stared at the chain link fence. And they came over and they were like, "Oh my gosh, she does have an Indian grandmother." I was like, "Yes, I do." Well, we know. I mean, we can be silly, kids can lie and whatnot, but I wasn't. I didn't feel like I was. It was coming. It was so for me. So I was laying on the table at that first session with Katie, and suddenly I just saw her, and she was there. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly because I've only ever seen it written. I've never heard it spoken. But the way I would pronounce what I've seen written is, and if this is also in my book, Anichi Hoyo, which means a woman who is to be preferred above all others. And that's what her name means. And so it was so interesting because at the same time, my dad, my paternal grandfather, had passed away. We had gone to his funeral. We had ended up in this hearse, I guess is the word for it, with this relative from Indiana. I was in Tennessee, who had done all this genealogical work on my dad's family. And so he gave us the papers and was sharing all of it with us. That's when I started to, dive into my family. And on my dad's side, the paternal side, yes, there is my paternal grandmother, actually two of them that are Indigenous women, but the one furthest back is Anichi Hoyo. And she was actually, I'm not making this up, she was an Indian princess. She and her sister, like their father was the chief, and they were given to white men in Georgia as part of, like an agreement, a trade for peace. And then, the descendants began. But she came to me then, and I saw her, and she gave her name, and that is her name. Like, you can go look her up on the internet. Like, she's there because it's very documented because of who she was and whatnot. But anyway, the name, where it means a woman who is to be preferred above all others. And I just feel like her name alone is medicine. Because, like you said, the shame, the guilt, when you feel like your body's full of like poisons and toxins and just all this stuff that's like muck, and sludge, and you're not at all feeling like you're a woman to be preferred above all others. Like for her to come and remind you of who you are, like you
Sounds
said.
like a very straight spine.
Yes. Well, she's so lovely because this is a beautiful part. Let's talk about grandmothers with Black Cohosh medicine because, when we experience trauma, like we're talking about, particularly sexual trauma and even psychological, emotional trauma, even religious trauma, whatever, in our families, we're usually not the first generation to have experienced that. This is a line of this. So I have her, and I've described her the way I've described her. But you don't have to go too many generations down in my dad's line to be like, what happened? I mean, it goes south fast. Okay, so that's my dad's line. Then in my mom's line, I had this experience at a herbal conference. So I have my mom, she's living. Her mother recently passed away a handful of years ago. And then I did meet my great grandmother before she passed. Now, as people have heard from my talking, my mom doesn't, she's not done well. She's not doing well, like with her own experiences from her mother,
Mhm.
right? But her mother also did not do well with her experiences, not so much from her mom, but from her dad. So we have this line, you know? So I go to this herbal conference, and it's several years ago, and Rosemary Gladstar was there. They had invited her to this particular conference, which it no longer exists, but the Southeast Women's Conference. And the theme was grandmothers. And so they invited Rosemary, understandably so. So we're sitting there, and this was in the middle of my remembering of all this. And Rosemary said that night that she wanted us to sit and she wanted us to feel all of the women who were standing behind us, our mother, our grandmother, our great, and on and on and on, and feel like their hands on our shoulders all the way back. And so I sat there that night and I felt nobody, not even my mom. Nobody put their hands on my shoulders. On my maternal line, there was nobody standing behind me. It was so lonely. And I remember purposing in that moment that my daughters will never have this experience. Like they will have someone standing behind them. So when I did other work over the years with this process, I was with a woman and we were working with the maternal line, and she's like, understandably, she's like, okay, so we're going to do this, and we're going to go back to a well generation, a well line. So we started going, going, going. There's like nobody there on the website, just nobody. And finally, she's like, Amanda, I've never had to go this far back. Like, where are they? Where is someone? And I started to see just like dusty skeletal beings. It was very sad. It was very far back to get, and I ended up at this like almost almost point of origin creative feminine force. Like I had to go back to the beginning of all things on that line. But on my dad's line, I had my grandmother show up, Anichi Hoyo, several generations back. But when you say straight spine, the times that she has come to me, Tara, she is. She's just like, she's a column. She's straight. Her shoulders are back. She's regal. She's done, she's just beautiful. She's solid, and she's straight, and she's powerful. And the lovely thing about when she comes now, it's just, you know, when we experience certain forms of trauma, we can be abandoned by our families. They can fail, our families at this time and place. And we can feel very alone. And it's amazing because when she comes now, she comes and she comes with all of my people. She comes with all of the Choctaw people. These are your people. And and even though they're on the other side of the veil, they're just as real, and you're not alone. And this is your lineage also, and you can draw from this strength in your lineage. And so if I'm doing well and she's doing well and we're connected, then I believe, like, through the bloodlines, through the energy lines, something is happening. And people who are more experienced with this can talk about it, better, that healing these lines, so that hopefully with my daughters, with me feeling supported, even if it's further back, I can turn and face them. And hopefully as they go forward, hopefully they will look back. And because of Black Cohosh, and my grandmother showing up, they will hopefully see me as, she was straight, she was tall, she was solid. Do you know what I'm saying? And I can, when you think about the back, I can lean on her, like I can rest on her, like there's strength in her. I can stand up because of her. Because we do, like you said, our own light, we stand on our own. But until we can stand on our own, we get to lean on our, hopefully, whatever form it takes, our mothers, our grandmothers.
And as Mother's Day approaches, a great message that has come to me in my life, because definitely the mother wound has been the greatest wound that I've experienced, and I haven't gotten into details, but just earth shattering kind of stuff. And so there's two that remind me of tornado, but I'll have to get there. A real gift that my dear friend bestowed upon me is at a time in life, as almost in my mid 30s, maybe around 32, 33, we were both around the same age. And that's about when she had her first child. And I was at the same time of dealing with still a decade of just really lamenting, not just lamenting, but like experiencing deep, profound grief for having experienced this mother wound and the the fallout that happens. I lost the whole rest of my family,
Yes.
and whether it was overt or just like you don't know who you can trust, or essentially what side they're on. And looking back, I would do things differently, and maybe someday we'll get into that kind of stuff too. But nonetheless, that's where I was. And at the same time, at that point in life, I wasn't seeing the future that I had envisioned or wanted to. It was not coming to fruition, including having my own children, which was actually a part of. Um, uh, she put out that curse, quite literally, and so it was just is what has been called a dark night of the soul. Now I've looked in the dark night of the soul as actually there's kind of like a modern understanding of. So it was more like the modern understanding, like just the deepest, darkest time in your life. You're trying to dig out of a muddy pit and you just slide back in constantly. And so at that time, my very good friend had her first baby, and I was, very happy for her. And at the same time, it was a real blessing in the sense that it's hard to be in your sorrow when somebody you care about, is experiencing something beautiful.
Yeah.
And at that same time, shortly after she had her second child, and she asked my husband and I to be godparents of both their children. And she's really impressed me how she's really invited me in particular into their life. My husband's welcome too, but you have different relationships with your best friends, right? The girls rather than the guys. And has always been just with arms wide open. And on Mother's Day, she'll wish me a happy Godmother's Day. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you're just this beautiful, wonderful mother. But to extend that, it was such a gift to then also reflect back in my life and see the many different mother figures I've had in my life. And that mothering is also an energy,
Yes.
not at all to take away from the actual mothering, being a mother, but also to give credence to and recognition to that it's an energy, it's an archetype as well. And that it can be appreciated and experienced and also given out, even without having your own children. And that was really a tremendous blessing. The Scorpio, or sorry, the tornado thing, which is very scorpionic, is you're talking about what I heard is you were talking about healing generations, right? Backwards and forwards. And I believe that that's possible. I believe you can go by doing your own healing. You can heal backwards, forwards, around you,
Yes.
in all directions. Yeah. And here's a story that maybe might help to bring that together as well. During the very traumatic times when I was separating from my family, I was still really caught up in I knew what I had experienced was wrong, and like I probably shouldn't be around them, but I loved them. And I was like, I'm going to try to make this better, and also being the oldest child. And I was the type of person that was always kind of the saver in the family, and the fixer, right? And so it was at this time that I was still trying to fix things, but finally just deciding I had to stay away. And that was really hard too, because then I felt guilty that I was choosing to be away from the people I love, that they said they love me, but the actions were very different. And so what would happen is for years, I would have tornado dreams.
Mm.
And not every night, but they would show up on occasion. And then I would hear, then I was also starting to reconnect with my grandma because I didn't know that she's the one person I've been able to reconnect with. And we were actually really grown, especially closer than ever. And so during that time, I was reconnecting with her, and then she would say, "Oh, did you notice that so and so, this happened or that happened?" And so I was picking up on things that were happening in their life,
Oh, yeah.
and whether they even before they tried to contact me, and once went no contact, but they still try to contact me,
Mm.
and I would get this premonition. I would have a tornado dream
Wow.
before something
Mm.
tumultuous
Mm.
tumultuous would happen. So to me, that's proof. I think that the
Yes.
energy goes both ways, and I do think that it can go previous generations as well.
Yeah, I do too. I agree. And I think that's really just extraordinary what you've said about the tornado and, picking up on the energy of what's happening and the energy going both ways because it helped in my mind, it returns me to the spider medicine again. I know Matt especially emphasizes Black Cohosh as snake medicine, and it is, but I've really experienced it also as the spider because, and the reason I say that is because so the spider's on the web, right?
Mm-hmm.
This web, but anywhere there's the vibration, the spider is picking it up. Because the fact is that we are all connected. It is all connected. So you are feeling, these little vibrations in the field,
Mm-hmm.
that the spider's able to pick up. So I just think that's extraordinary, the dream, the vividness of it, and then also the connection back to the spider medicine and this field and the work we're doing. And sometimes I felt that way, that I knew I was moving through stuff that was mine, but sometimes it can feel like you are moving through so much more than
Mm-hmm.
what's just yours. And even especially as women, I mean, we're told that we were in our grandmother's wombs. Even
Yes.
just physically, we were in her womb, right? So we really do have the physical, genetic DNA, even beyond the inner, or even in addition to the energetic spiritual aspects of it. These things are real. We are often also processing their trauma,
Yes.
literally. And I love it too what you said that you reconnected with your grandmother because obviously the grandmother image was wanting to come through, because when you said you were able to reconnect with her, um, I had a similar experience. Like grandmothers are medicine. I'm sure some people have had difficult grandmothers. I had a difficult grandmother. She got better as she got older, but
Mm-hmm.
very much put some things into the family. But when this happened to me, like you, my mom she's the gateway to everybody else. So I grew up with so many cousins around, my aunts and uncles, they all lived close together. You know, my mom would get together with her brothers and sisters on a Friday night and they'd play card games and I'd play with my cousins, holidays. I mean, we were a part of each other's life. I was surrounded by family. And then when this happened, my mom being sort of the gateway, they're gone, all of them. So it didn't just lost my mom or lose my mom. Siblings, cousins, aunts and uncles, grandparents, everybody. And like you said, you don't know why, you don't know. It's just, well, Paul is mad at her. I'm sorry, I try not to say her name, but Paul is mad at her, or well, we just don't want to get involved, or we don't know what to think about. You just don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when I first began to remember all of this, my whole world turned upside down because I really hadn't remembered any of it. And it wasn't all awful, right? There's positive things. That was one of the things that my former partner said to my mom when she was like, I don't believe her. He said, I believe her because she's never said anything bad about any of you. She's always been like, this was great, this was great, that was great, this was great. The fact that she's saying this now is so like out of character. Like it's not like she's been trying to, she sat around saying, I just couldn't stand my childhood, or I didn't like my parents like this, this is part of it. But so I had had at least, it wasn't all negative. I had a life I had enjoyed. I had good memories. I thought I was loved. Maybe I was. But I sat on a bed one night and I thought to myself, did anybody ever love me? Like, was there anybody that ever loved me with, all these people in my family? And who came into my mind was my father's mother, my maternal grandmother, Genevieve, Jenny. And as soon as she came into mind, I was like, she did. She did really love me. She did actually really enjoy me. But at that point, I hadn't spoken to her or seen her in so many years because my husband didn't like my dad even before I mean, you know how it is, blah, 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 blah. And then you can't see all the people and all the stuff. So anyway, but I just started to feel drawn to her. And one night I was laying in bed and I hadn't had any contact with my dad at all to this point either for years. And I had this just in that moment between waking and sleeping in the morning. So it wasn't really a dream, I guess like a premonition, uh, that my dad called me and told me that she had died. And that didn't actually happen until years later. He did call and tell me that. But it made me even more like I have to see her. So one weekend, I got a friend because my husband wasn't, just wasn't the person to go up and see her, just my dad. And we went up to see her. It had probably been 10 years or something. So not too long, but long. And I knocked on her door and she opened the door and she looked at me kind of funny, and I said, "Hey, Mama, it's Amanda." And she looked at me funny again. I said, "It's me. It's Amanda." Wow, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. So sweet. And she got teary eyed and she was like, "I love you." Just right away. We went in. My friend sat on the couch while she and I just visited. She was just beaming. Like there was just love. There was just love. And so I was able to see her quite a few more times before she passed and able to take my younger children to see her, you know. And so I have that. I was able to reconnect with her, I was able to go visit her, able to see her, able to be there for her funeral, talk to the black walnut that's on her property. There's a Into Sophie interview with that black walnut where he talks about her specifically, about Jenny. And, it's just so sweet. So I'm thinking, part of what Black Cohosh is wanting to bring through is part of this medicine of the grandmother, the maternal line.
Yeah.
And maybe it won't be, but for me it was paternal. But this idea of the women, either way, that can be standing behind us. We might have to go a little further back than we like, but that we're not alone. Like you said, if we can heal forwards and backwards, we can also reconnect. I think, forwards and backwards, and draw strength from those places. So that what I saw on my back, I really love that you used that imagery. I think we're making a distinction that's really important that I hadn't been making before, which is the scorpionic, more like scorpion, this toxicity, and like I mentioned, this grandmother spider, because that's often how we see the spider. You see this difference, that's there, and one is very nourishing, and we want to be connected to that, and the other we might need to expel.
Yeah. I love, love, love that you brought in the image of the web. I mean, that really, literally and figuratively, like just the image itself is something that ties things together, and the vibrations. And um, we thought that this wasn't going to go 2 hours. We're already an hour and a half in, but may I share about my grandmother experience and how that? So we didn't have quite a reunion like that, but what it's been is in the years since, probably 15, there's probably a good 5 years that we just hadn't connected. And part of looking back, I realized that some of the family members that I felt that I had lost was, they were just dealing with life.
Yeah.
That's one of the things. They didn't necessarily turn away. I have had family members say that my mom threatened them and this was like, I don't want you to have a relationship with my grown daughter or daughters. So that is true. But I feel it's been extremely healing to reconnect with my grandma. And I was really deliberate in the beginning, in particular, that it didn't become about her daughter, right? And in our issue together, that we developed our own relationship. outside of that. And then years later, we did start talking a little bit and about, her upbringing and her background. And absolutely, there's trauma going back, for sure, at least as far back as her. And it certainly helped, so I got to learn about my mom's upbringing and, what was going on when she was little. And so, of course, it's classic kind of, the traumatizer has experienced trauma as well, right? And so what's so strange, and I'm going to say this because I'm sure other people are experiencing this too, is that I was afraid for a while. It felt better in a way. Didn't feel good, but it felt I wanted to keep the anger that I had for her and the justification to stay away and to be upset and to almost like not see her as a human, but just like it was, I wanted to, and at the same time it was hard to like recognize that she's a person. What she did was really evil. Does or does that make her an evil person? There's the combining the two, and then there's also, okay, she did an evil thing, but doesn't make her, does that not necessarily, I can't even say it, still might not necessarily mean that she's an evil person, but then also to see her as a human being who I learned through my grandma had this kind of upbringing. And I was afraid for quite a while that I would feel more compassion for her, and then I would want to try to get together. And so there's that stage, right? But over the years now, and even just in the last couple of months, my grandma and I have had these really healing talks. And I think they are healing for her as well, in the sense that, we're both getting perspective, right? But we don't have the emotional charge as if we were discussing with the person. So it's like therapy, but you're not explaining to the therapist. You know how it gets tiring sometimes when you're trying to you're explaining a story over again. But what's wonderful is with her, she knows, but from her own vantage point, but we don't have that emotional charge between us.
Yes. I love what you said. Because part of what Black Cohosh said, also a message it gave once, and I think I read it also in the message, was you are electrifying. I mean, so it is talking about a current through the body, but like you said, a charge. And I think that that's part of what was happening for me with working with Black Cohosh was, we talked about this some with Rose in our last session about being able to see them as humans with their own stories, their own traumas, right? But I feel like with Black Cohosh for me, when you talk about the anger and the charge not being there, that's what it was like. It was dispelling like that charge. So I mentioned cleavers with the rage. That was rage that was very directed towards my dad. Like it could have been other places, but in my story, it focused on my dad. Whatever aspect of rage and anger that was, it was his. But the Black Cohosh, I feel, was exactly what you're saying. You are electrifying, but we want to like you said, dispel the charge and let the current like flow in a positive way, right. that brings light, and so a lot of what I was releasing, I don't know what all it was, I don't know. We probably don't want to know, what all is being released. And it wasn't all just my mom, it was also stuff that happened with my dad. And you know what? Probably so many other experiences that I don't even know about and things that weren't even mine, all these things. But I do also think part of what I was releasing was the anger that I was feeling at my mom. The anger that was also mine, my response to it, that was causing this congestion. So I really appreciate that you shared that and used that wording to dispel the charge, because we are electrifying, but depending on how you use that, you can electrocute. This is dangerous. You don't want to be around it. Like, the image I'm getting in my head is like a downed power line and like sparks are constantly flying. Like you're not going to touch it. But if we get to a point where it's rightly directed and even insulated, like in a a
Right.
good and proper way, then it's positive. And like you said, now we can talk about it. So I do feel like now I'm able to talk about these things and there's not the charge. I still feel stuff which we want to do, right?
Mm.
But it's not dangerous. That's really the word for me. It's not dangerous. Um, for at least for me, to talk about it with her. So I think that is also some very good vocabulary to bring in talking about Black Cohosh.
So
Yeah.
interesting what comes up. We all don't, hey, everybody, we don't plan these. The most we plan is which herb we're going to talk about. And I think it's absolutely amazing what comes up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, they just do their own thing. They have their own medicine that they want to bring through. It's really it's just so magical and beautiful. I'm so glad that it's in the world. Yeah, thank you, Tara.
You've hinted at a bit at least, but maybe as an attempt to kind of button this up before your another beautiful song. How would you describe the before and after you, before and after Black Cohosh? You did mention, moving your hips, being able to move.
You know, I think one of the greatest gifts that it gave me was my connection to my indigenous grandmother. That might not be everybody's experience, but it did bring with through her, like she's definitely been a modality for it because I began to identify less with my mom and more with her. Like choosing the family, the ancestors, who do we want to be like? Because we sometimes will say, I don't want to be like my mom, or I don't want to be like my dad, or I'm sure my kids think and say the same things, But so who do I want to be like? Who is an example that I'd like to follow? So, and when I say that, it's not being outside of myself. It's beginning to embody those things that really are also a part of me. So I feel like part of what it's given me is I do stand straighter. I do stand taller. The scoliosis isn't all gone. It's better, but it's more of an energy. It's more of an energetic. It's more of a feeling. That I do have a line of support, right? That I do have this line of support. I think that that's one of the uh, most significant differences about myself is that it's just, I mean, it's so simple, but I began to stand up straighter. Instead of like going into a room and kind of just being mousy or kind of just being sort of over, I don't know, all the ways we just kind of, you know what I'm saying? Just energetically and physically standing taller, standing up straighter. And that was a really pivotal time. And when we start to do this kind of work and we start to change, life is probably going to change too. More than just us is going to change. But that was when I also began to do that. I began to shine my light. I didn't know what my light was before. I didn't even really know I had one. Like, I was supposed to, like, just support my husband's light, right? And that's not like bad to support other people's light, but it was like I mean, I didn't have one. It's everybody else's lights. You know what I'm saying? I was like a supporting, not even, I wasn't even a supporting actress. We did go further down. I was an extra. You know what I'm saying? So, but I didn't know I had a light. So I bring that up because that was the time when I started to find it. I was taking, from everybody's different, but I was taking the herbal classes with Teresa. Matt had started to show up, to come to the classes. And I did start to discover that I was good at this. And I did hear the plants. And I remember this. This was the same night as Black Cohosh. Oh my goodness, when you're asking me what's different.
Mm.
So that session was over. And Stephen, my husband then, he had come. Usually I would go up for the classes and he would stay with the kids, for that day or whatever. But because of the session with Katie and the this and the that, he came up with me that Friday evening. I was going to spend the night for class the next day in case it didn't go well. Because, it's only my second session with her. And the first one, as I said in a previous talk, I just shook violently, and then the vertigo and all this. So he came in case I just needed a ride home, that I wasn't really going to be able to stay. So the session with Katie was over, and she and I were going to be with Matt to do some sessions with some people, clinical sessions, and get something to eat. And so Steven said to me, are you feeling okay? I was like, yeah, I think I'm okay. Like, that was a good session. I think I'll be okay, to say I feel good. And also I was around good people. I felt supported with Matt and Teresa and Katie there. It makes me kind of teary-eyed. Anyway, so Steven said to me, is that Matt over there? Because he'd heard me like, Matt. I said, is that Matt over there? I said, it is. And he said, well, before I go, I just want to go, introduce myself to him and say hi. Oh, this is so interesting to me. I'm so thankful for Matthew Wood. So Stephen goes over, and I watch them have this exchange, and it looks like it goes well, but it also, there's a moment where it looks a little surprising, So Stephen comes back over, and I said, well, what did you think of him? And he's like, he seems like a really nice man. I'm really glad to have him as a teacher. And I said, what did you say to him? And Stephen said, I said, thank you for being nice to Amanda. And Matt said to him, this is how Stephen put it, and I believe him, well, she's a good herbalist. And the point wasn't like, because Stephen was saying it like, oh, pat, pat, pat. Mm-hmm. Thank you for being nice to Amanda. And Matt was saying, she's good at what she does. There was like, so they're saying these words and they're not being unkind to each other, and it's this unspokenness there of one patting me on the head and the other saying, do you know what she's capable of?
Mm-hmm. They saw you in different lights.
Yes, they saw me in different lights. Mm-hmm. And Matt was someone who helped me begin to see mine. Katie did, and Matt did, and Teresa did, because I didn't know. And so to have Matt say those things was helpful. I remember there's one night in the lodge. This is kind of funny. This is all at the same time when you're like, how are you different? So I stood up taller. I was more confident, felt like I could be supported, starting to shine my own light more, see my own light. I didn't even know like what it was, recognize it. So Matt and I, we did this clinic together. I'm not going to go into it. It's on a video actually on YouTube. We've already talked about this. He and I, we've told this story. But it was a rough night because I had a little bit of trouble that night finding the herb for the person. And it was the herb I told him at the beginning. And he was like, no, Amanda, that's not it, which isn't really how Matt is. But he was really like short, like, no, Amanda. And I was like, oh, okay, because he's my teacher. So I just didn't. But it wasn't any of the other ones he did either. So at the end, he says, it was motherwort. At the end, he says to me, he has his head down. I'm behind him. I'm not telling the story very clearly. People need to go watch the YouTube video. But he says, Amanda, get me the motherwort. So I got it. And it was the one the person needed. So the person leaves, and, we're sitting there. I'm really condensing this. And he was very tired that night because he had seen quite a few people, and he had already taught that day. He was very tired. We were just sitting there. And that's when his pulse book had first come out. And I had asked him earlier in the day if he'd mind to sign mine. But we were sitting there, and I'm like, I'm not going to bother. Like, he's obviously tired. And I didn't know if he was, like, mad at me, And he wasn't. We've talked about it. But he's your teacher. You're like, we're just sitting there. And he says on his own, where's your pulse book? I can sign it. And I was like, okay. Again, I got my pulse book. He said, I haven't even seen one, like, in person yet. He's like, this is the first one I've seen. So he looks at it. He signs it. I didn't want to read it until I got home because I just, it felt weird. I don't know. I just thought I'd wait till I get home. So he gives it back to me. We're walking out of the yurt to go separate ways. I say goodnight. He says goodnight. And then as I'm walking away, he says, Amanda. And I said, yes. And turned around, and he said, if you ever want to make applications to the American Herbalist Guild, I'll recommend you. And he just nodded and walked off. And it was his way that night of saying, okay. And when I went home and I read the note, it's over there. I'd have to get it to read it exactly. But part of what he said in the note was, to Amanda, something, my fellow herbalist. But that really meant a lot to me because I didn't have the confidence yet. I didn't see it in myself yet. you know? So that was a long sort of answer to your question, but it's a
Beautiful.
beautiful part of its medicine. Like we said, what is your light? What wants to rise from your depths? What's down there that's got buried under all this? Like the Bible verse when you have your light and you hide it under a bushel. Like that's the perfect image of Black Cohosh.
Mhm.
And then I sang this little light of mine. What? Hide it under a bushel? No, I'm going to let it shine. So it enables us to be able to do that.
I could have thought of a better way to end it. Yeah, beautifully woven together. Yeah. What
Yeah,
an
thank Black Cohosh.
absolutely. These have just been amazing. Well, how about that song?
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up. I haven't sung it in so long. I actually wrote this song for a songwriting contest.
Hmm.
It didn't win. That's okay. It's a good song. I think, anyways. Okay, so I'm gonna try. I might mess it up. I haven't sung it in so long, but I want to sing it because it's Black Cohosh medicine. So I'll do my best. All right. I know you're broken and you've spilled what's inside. I know you're hurting and all you want to do is hide. And I know this burden has crushed your back and made you cry. But I want you to know I see your light. I know you're weary and your hope is almost gone, and I know it's heavy and you wonder how long, and I know you're empty and feel anything but strong. But I want you to know I see your light. And in this ending, you are beautiful and bright. You are glowing from a place deep inside that can't be extinguished, that never fades but always shines. And I want you to know I see your light. And you're standing taller than you've ever stood before. You're no longer smaller than the monster at the door. You no longer falter. Your steps are steady and sure. And I want you to know I see your light. And in this ending, you are beautiful and bright. You are glowing from a place deep inside that can't be extinguished, that never fades but always shines. And I want you to know I see your light. And I know it feels you're fading in the dark, but I promise you the light inside your heart is shining through. I know you're weary and your hope is almost gone, and I know it's heavy. And yet you've held on, and I promise there's plenty of magic to come. And I want you to know I see your light. And I want you to know you're beautiful and bright. I'd forgotten all those words, but it's perfect, like Cohosh medicine.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
Isn't that
Ah,
funny?
well, if any of this touched your heart, parts of you that you may not have been in touch with for a while, I really highly recommend Amanda's book, Flowers for a Girl, Plant Medicine and Sexual Trauma. And like I mentioned before, I think it's very helpful for various kinds of trauma. and it's poetic enough, specific enough, but also just you can see yourself in the story, and I think it's very, very healing. So can't recommend it enough. And also check out Amanda's site with all sorts of other great resources to check out, and her beautiful newsletters. That's Alchemillas, ALCHEMILLAS.com. And Amanda is one of our wonderful teachers at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. She teaches particularly with Matthew on animal medicines and also plant attunement. And they're just really captivating classes. So I highly recommend checking those out. And we have, while you're there, make sure to download these free Materia Medica cards, which are absolutely amazing. They are the most up-to-date information on Matthew Wood's Materia Medica information, more up-to-date than his books, because once you publish a book, it's he keeps on learning, that's for sure. And so it's the most up-to-date information. Highly recommend going and picking those up for free at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com. We are getting so many beautiful comments in the chat here from Facebook, YouTube, and so forth. Amanda, I highly recommend you check them out afterwards. There's too many to mention here, but praise for your beautiful singing. A lot of ladies saying that's really touching them and helping them, and which I for sure am very grateful, because these are difficult things to talk about. And I know Amanda and I have touched on at length relatively to a podcast how important it is to us to deliver the message appropriately. This is not at all to speak disparagingly about any of our people in our lives that we experience this with. It is really truly meant to be healing. And so I hope that that's how it's received and felt, and that it's helping you where all you are at.
Yeah. Thank you, Tara. I really appreciate these spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, this has been, I knew this would be special when you proposed, keeping on going with each herb, and we have more. So make sure to, at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism YouTube channel, make sure to like, subscribe, absolutely share this with a friend if you feel it would be helpful. Go to the YouTube channel. If you're watching this on Facebook, for example, go to the YouTube channel, Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, and check out the comments. There's some really helpful comments in there as well. And make sure to like, subscribe, turn on the notifications. Amanda and I have these scheduled out, so I put them out on YouTube so you can know days in advance when we're going to do this live, because it is fun to participate with you live as well.
Yeah. And I want to say one thing. I don't usually do this, but it actually fits really well. Mm-hmm. On my website, I actually offer what are called virtual creative residencies. I know it's kind of wordy, but they're 4 weeks or 8 weeks, but they're one-on-one sessions. And the whole point of them is to open up your creativity with plants as the portals. It's plant medicine for creativity. And that's just really fitting, I feel, with Black Cohosh and what we said about we are creative. So Black Cohosh can come through, tulip poplar can come through, chamomile. It just depends. They're very tailored to the person because they're one-on-one. But it feels fitting to mention that because of Black Cohosh, that the creative residency sessions and the stuff that comes through is amazing. I had this woman out in Minnesota. She was a choreographer, a dancer, and through it, like, she choreographed this whole dance performance and ended up having it there in Minneapolis. And there's been others with music and song and writing, but that might be of interest to somebody. If you're like, I want to be creative, I've got something in there that wants to come out. The plants are really lovely, because Black Cohosh meant we are creative, Black Cohosh, but it also meant we are like the plants. Like, come on, guys, you can work with this in ways you don't maybe have not yet fully imagined. So I want to make sure to mention those.
Wonderful. That sounds like a beautiful experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Amanda, we are 6 minutes short of the 2-hour mark, so we didn't quite go 2 hours. But there's a lot that had to come out, that wanted to come out. Mm-hmm. So it's been lovely. It's been healing for me as well. So thank you as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.